Are we about to witness the world's first AI water wars where countries compete to either attract or repel these thirsty data centers?
Over the next decade, we'll see areas that become completely uninsurable.
And Scott Bryson, who is the founder at Orbital Farm,
This is going to be like a hot take, maybe, but this podcast is going to be full of hot takes.
Nathaniel, who is the founder of the AI and Environment Resource Hub and has curated over 500 AI and environment resources. Making an image with generative AI uses as much energy as charging your phone, or a ChatGPT query requires nearly 10 times as much electricity to process a Google query.
We have 8,500 data centers around the world today.
But one thing that stood apart was the honesty and transparency of Google, which reported
83% of all coral reefs on the planet have experienced bleaching events. Go scuba diving and snorkeling. Microsoft or data centers or Google don't sell tomatoes. They're not in the business of selling tomatoes. And so what we have is a financial system and structure that is set up in silos, power bill for his house going up 3 times, and was asking me like, what's going on there? And I was like, well, actually, it's going to get a lot worse.
this isn't just a waste heat problem, but it's a wasted business opportunity as well for the AI companies.
Caltech had a space solar project sending data centers to space using pure solar energy.
AI is meant to solve climate change, but will our taps run dry before we reach there?
I would love AGI to solve climate change. Will it? No, I don't think so.
Our kids should be able to eat real strawberries instead of just counting the number of hours in the strawberries using AI. Hello and welcome to On Air with Aashka. Today we are tackling a crucial question. AGI is meant to solve climate change, but will our taps run dry before we reach there? I'm joined by two awesome blossom guests, Nathaniel, who is a founder of the AI and Environment Resource Hub and has curated over 500 AI and environment resources, and Scott Bryson, who is the founder at Orbital Farm and is turning the data center heat waste into enough tomatoes that can feed 7.5 million Canadians. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
So let's start with Nathaniel. You have curated over 500 resources at your AI and environmental resource hub. So, what initially sparked your transition from marine ecology to becoming an AI for good researcher? And what's been the most surprising insight you have discovered about AI's environmental impact?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. So one weekend I just woke up and I was trying to find a podcast. I think it was about Dr. Sasha Luccioni's one of Dr.
Oh,
Sascioni's like very great talks from like Hugging Face. She's the AI and
yes,
climate lead
yes,
for
yes,
anyone who
yes.
doesn't know.
Yeah, she's
Really
my
amazing.
ideal. Yeah.
She's like one of my heroes, honestly, in the whole
Yeah,
field.
exactly.
So I just woke up one weekend and I couldn't find one specific episode I was trying to look for, and then that sparked honestly the creation of the database. So
Okay.
fast forward 7 to 8 months later, the database like evolved into its like own thing. I've had researchers, policymakers, educators, everyone just reach out about it. This is great. And then that's the funny story. And then the more serious story is that I saw the federal government taking AI seriously in like a lot of federal procurement processes. And that was not just at like, for example, EPA, where I used to work. This was across the entire swath of federal agencies.
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
if something as like bureaucratic and as large as the federal government is taking AI seriously, you know there's going to be a true monumental shift in how we work, how we play, how we live in society. So that was the two main causes of the switch over. And probably the most surprising insight overall about the environmental impacts of AI. So if you apply a life cycle assessment to the entire thing, it's not just, let's say, energy impacts. So a lot of people fail to realize there's multiple dimensional impacts of like environmental
Yeah.
stuff with AI. So there's energy, water, air quality issues from data centers, embodied carbon with like the sourcing of like the tech equipment for data centers. There's a whole swath. And so that was part of my mission, was to help like broaden the knowledge gap in those areas and also talk about AI for good applications. So
Yeah, that's a very interesting story. And so, coming to you, Scott, in your LinkedIn, you describe Orbital Farm as building closed loop systems with the potential to produce vaccines, medicines, hydrogen, energy, and food on a global scale using water, CO2, and electricity as primary resources. So, how do you see AI transforming these circular systems, and what's the most exciting AI application for sustainable infrastructure that you are currently exploring?
I'm a sustainable infrastructure architect, and what
Mhm.
that means specifically is that I look at the assets that revolve around energy, around chemicals, around food, around water, around air handling systems, all of these core technologies that build, make up and build our world, whether that's digital as servers sitting in a building, or whether that's manufacturing facilities, and I look at these as the integrated ecosystems. And that specifically means for a data center, that means looking at how the energy is produced. It means looks at how the energy is stored and utilized. It means how the heat is extracted from those servers, and then importantly, what that goes into and how that's utilized. And so the way that we have developed data centers in the past, up until really just recently, has been these very linear systems, and it's not just data centers; it's all of our industrial ecosystems.
Yeah.
And we look at these systems and how we finance them, the scale of these facilities, and we only look at this singular asset. And the impact has been minimal to date. And this is why what has driven this. And the big step change that we have gone through with the explosion of AI, its capabilities, and its opportunity to really transform society and business and operations. The profound difference, though, is the scale and the size of the impact
Yeah.
that they have and how that waste heat is utilized. It's a completely opposite opportunity, actually.
Yeah.
Heat, and the only term waste heat, it is really only waste because it's very difficult to convert it back to electricity. It's actually a better way of saying it's a low temperature heat. And it isn't just always low temperature heat. If you get into liquid cooling systems and those areas, you get actually to quite high temperature heat resources that can be used to convert, upwards of the top 8% back to electricity. You can use some of that into district heating systems. You can use that into greenhouses. You can use that into absorption cooling. And we have to think about our ecosystems in a vastly different way of these industrial assets. And so my work is really focused around financing, around engineering and designing these large scale systems to really make and go from what today is a huge water footprint and a major problem into something that creates an abundance of water. If you pair these things correctly, you could capture more water than is necessary to cool these systems. So data centers can not only become food production hubs and resources and energy and heat resources, but they can also produce fresh water in extreme heat locations if you design them correctly. And you don't have to invent anything new. We have all of these technologies today.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's how I approach these.
yeah, that's a very interesting take. And so, since you brought this up about the waste heat utilization, so you recently posted that data centers don't have to be job deserts and explained how a 140 megawatt data center could support winter heating for 300 acres of greenhouses, creating 750 permanent jobs and producing enough tomatoes for 7.5 million Canadians annual tomato consumption. Is this heat recapture model being seriously considered by major AI companies? And what's preventing the wider adoption of these enough tomato producing approach or circular approaches? Because it seems very interesting theoretically, but like what's happening on the ground?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, that was an exercise that I went through that really
Hmm.
helped catalyze and really helped humanize and understand, well, what is actually the opportunity here? What is the potential
Yeah.
impact that these can have? It's really important to always bring things back to contextual understanding when talking about large, big systems. So I took a 140 megawatt scale data center. There's a 140 megawatt data center here in Canada that has the intention of pairing it together with greenhouses. It's currently been built as a data center, and they don't have greenhouses alongside it yet. And they wish to, and they wish to have the integration, and they put in heat exchanger rooms, and they put in liquid cooling systems to enable that, but the actual greenhouse implementation hasn't been done. And so I went through an exercise and said, well, let's take a look at how would you size a greenhouse system to support this. And when you're sizing heating requirements for greenhouses, what you do is you take the coldest day of the year and you take the maximum heating requirement to be able to support that. And that would be how many natural gas boilers you would put in to that greenhouse that would burn natural gas and create that amount of energy to be able to heat that facility. And so if you take that methodology and you take a look at a crop like tomatoes, we've got a lot of tomato
Yeah, yeah,
greenhouses
of course.
in
That's
Canada.
one. Yeah, yeah,
It's it could be anything.
yeah.
There's a greenhouse not far from Toronto here that grows papaya and guava, and they're
Hmm.
going to start to grow dragon fruit soon. And it doesn't
Yes,
have to be a
yes.
tropical greenhouse, but
Uh-huh.
tomatoes.
Hmm.
Canadians eat a lot of these. And if you took a look at that, 140 megawatts of heat, which gets produced every hour while the data center is operating, and you take the coldest day of the year, that's somewhere between 110 and 300 acres of greenhouses, depending on the height of the greenhouse and depending on the technology you're using. So at the 300 acres of greenhouses to be able to support that at a 1-to-1 conversion ratio. So that's not taking account into any losses of heat in that situation. So if you could co-locate those greenhouses right beside it and didn't have to run it through a district heating system, for example, that would be able to support that entire heating requirement on that coldest day of the year. What that
Hmm.
means is that there's about 2.5 acres of employees per acre of greenhouse in Ontario
Hmm.
today. So 300 acres of greenhouses is 750 jobs.
Hmm.
That the quantity of tomatoes that 300 acres of greenhouses would produce is enough for the annual consumption to produce the annual consumption of 7.5 million Canadians tomato needs just from one data center in
Yeah,
just located here in
yeah.
Ontario. And the even better part is you could reduce the cost of those tomatoes by 15 to 17% in just calculating not having to burn natural gas to heat those tomatoes, let alone any other additional cost saving elements that come from this. And so you really have an
Yeah.
ability to create hundreds of jobs, local food production,
Hmm.
the ability to stop utilizing fresh water that would otherwise just be evaporative cooling that data center, and be able to reduce the cost by a significant amount at a wholesale price to grocery stores at a reduced cost for those products, and improve the environmental footprint across both assets, both the data center and your greenhouse production. And so this is just an example, but it's
Yes.
reflective of the scale that we
Yeah.
have. And we have 8,500 data centers around the world
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
And
Imagine the scale if we, yeah, scale it across all the data centers that we have. Yeah.
you got it. And so why your question was more about
Hmm.
why is this not being done?
Yeah,
What is that
exactly.
inhibitor? And
Yeah.
and and there's some pretty simple answers. One, Microsoft or data centers or Google
Hmm.
don't sell tomatoes. They're not in the business of selling tomatoes. They're not in the business of growing food. And so
Yeah.
this is a really important fact because they don't consider how they're being utilized. The
Mm.
people that run energy projects don't finance data centers. The people that finance greenhouses don't run data centers or energy projects. And so
Mm.
what we have is a financial system and structure that is set up in silos that works to finance each individual asset class. And we do that to advantage the underlying investors into those funds so they can create a diversified portfolio of energy investments and agriculture investments and data center or AI investments. And they want to have that diversification. But this leads and continues us in a systemic linear economy structure. And so
Mm.
really at the core of what the challenge becomes is how do we finance these
Mm.
infrastructure assets? And it doesn't have to
Yeah.
be the whole thing. It's
Mm.
really the catalytic capital at the beginning when you're
Yeah.
designing and siting the facility. Because you can
Yeah.
take a data center, but if you don't
Mm.
plan to have 110 acres of space where you could develop and build greenhouses, or if you don't
Mm.
develop that data center in a place where there's already a district heating system in place, or you don't even calculate what the cost to implement that might be. You might have a hospital literally right across the road from you. But if you don't even pay an engineer just the money to calculate, well, how much would it cost to run some heating pipes underneath the road to go over to that facility and actually activate a conversation with that other building that would be currently burning natural gas to heat a hospital, for example, the you never will know and you never implement those projects. And so it
Mm,
really takes not that much money, but it
mm,
takes it in that early design phase of where you're
mm,
siting and building. You can come into existing facilities and do this work. It is
mm.
obviously much more restrictive in terms of what you
Yeah,
can do, but
yeah.
there's plenty of opportunities to do these things. And this
Mm,
is really what we must do. And it's super imperative today as we're
mm.
developing gigawatt scale data centers or
Yeah.
multiple hundreds of megawatts of data centers.
Yes, yes. So, to me, this isn't just a waste heat problem, but it's a wasted business opportunity as well for the AI companies. Since you mentioned the stats that it can be turned into a viable business, so it is definitely a lost business opportunity. You represented this idea at the World AI Summit as well, right? So, how
I
was the
did.
response from the investors and other folks apart from the AI companies?
It was excellent. In fact, the AI companies were a bit confused at me being there, but it was very clear. They're like, "Well, but
Yeah,
you're not an
makes
app,"
sense.
and and the response back is, "Well, every single one of you requires to be on a data center. You don't
Yeah.
exist." I was at Consensus and speaking with
Hmm.
blockchain technologies, and the same
Hmm.
thing was met with
Yeah.
this. Well, it's funny that you're here. Why are you here? And it's well, every single person that is at this event, every single company that's here requires data centers.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to one other point that you said it is a massive opportunity to
Hmm.
utilize what
Hmm.
today is a wasted resource. But
Hmm.
on the other side of that coin, it's actually a major risk for existing assets. And the reason is because customers demand sustainability. This is
Hmm.
this is not
Yeah.
just this is not just politics at playing games be going back and forth between whether we value climate or not. The reality is water is one of the scarcest resources and will
Yeah.
become a major scarce resource. If you
Yeah.
are not utilizing your waste heat, that means you are evaporating water. If you are
Hmm.
not if you're not actually putting that to good use, you know, it is a major problem. And what you risk as an asset owner is that you get deprioritized in in a number of years because the scale of the new data centers coming on board will mean that you don't need to use older legacy data centers that are more expensive, that are going to be running less efficiently, that aren't going to be using the best GPUs. And if you as a data center owner are not designing this into your system today, forget about regulation. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Meta all have zero water footprint, zero carbon emission calculations. Their blockchain and Bitcoin calculation systems that only want to hold assets that have on their ledger that they were not
Hmm.
they were generated sustainably. And so this is a risk for asset owners that own data centers that are not entering into this situation. They may have a stranded asset, just like if you happen to own a coal power plant today in one of the G7 countries, you know,
Yeah.
the asset is going to be stranded. We're no longer going to be generating power from coal power in these countries. And so that's the risk if you don't enter into these situations.
Yes, yes. Completely agree. As per OECD research, water footprint or water consumption of AI data centers has been classified broadly into scope 1 and scope 2, right? So your model, this heat recapture model saves the scope 1 consumption of water and directly impacts the water footprint of the data centers. So it's really a wasted opportunity, as you mentioned. So, since we are talking about these stats that you came up with, like just using one pilot data center, we have been seeing these kind of alarming headlines about AI's energy consumption, with some estimates suggesting like making an AI image with generative AI uses as much energy as charging your phone, or a ChatGPT query requires nearly 10 times as much electricity to process a Google query. So, from your research, how accurate are these comparisons, Nathaniel, for you? And for Scott, as you have been working towards sustainable infrastructure for many years, what benchmarks should we actually be using to measure AI's energy usage? Since you brought up valuable stats, so these are the questions for both of you.
Who goes first?
Right.
Okay. No, Grant. So that's a very great question to like ask, especially like I've seen that statistic being quoted like all over the headlines, no matter like
Yeah.
who's talking, what organization. It's been so
Yeah.
fascinating trying to essentially debunk that like
Hmm.
fact. So I recently did a LinkedIn Live on the AI and energy landscape, like literally last Saturday. So in this LinkedIn Live, I had like a slide that directly talked about like the stat query about like does like a ChatGPT query require nearly 10 times as much
Yeah.
electricity? So the answer is that it's important to note that energy consumption can vary based on the specific AI model that you're talking
Yeah.
about, the type
Yes.
of AI task that you are running. Because, for example, a lot of folks don't realize that you can run different AI tasks. Like, there was a study that came out of Hugging Face quite recently in
Hmm.
association with a couple of universities. They looked at different AI tasks from like running a simple text based prompt all the way to text to video. And then the energy consumption metrics like were like off the scale depending on what type of task you logged.
Hmm.
So a lot of people don't realize that it's not all the same. Every
Hmm.
task like carries a different like
Yeah.
essentially like an amount of energy that corresponds to that.
Hmm.
And then also in a lot of cases, we don't know what's under the hood, quite literally, for
Yeah.
like a lot of these
Exactly.
energy models.
Yeah.
I think what's very fascinating about this is, and I went into a lot of detail about this, about like comparing, for example, DeepSeek with
Hmm.
like, let's say GPT-4. Like
Hmm.
the reason why DeepSeek had when it came out, like it created like ripples in the AI movement community. I
Yes.
think
Yeah.
Nvidia lost like Lord knows how much in terms of
Yeah.
stock. I was just like, this is an example of how ridiculous the stock market is. Like y'all just lost like billions of dollars.
Yeah.
But that being said, like I think a lot of people like in the US like saw DeepSeek as like a direct challenge where like we are
Hmm.
throwing billions of dollars quite literally
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
compute.
Literally.
We have this mentality where it's like, the bigger is better like
Yeah.
approach
The
with AI
scaling
models,
laws.
the
Yeah.
scaling
Yeah.
law, quite
Yeah.
literally. And then
Yeah.
you have DeepSeek that comes out and it's just like, hold up, wait, y'all trained DeepSeek on a
Yeah.
fraction of like the compute, energy,
Yeah.
and infrastructure.
Hmm.
Granted, how accurate those claims are with DeepSeek, I also
Hmm.
admitted this in my presentation. We
Okay.
don't fully know if that's true, but the
Uh-huh.
the point of this is that DeepSeek represents kind of like the frugal AI principle, where it's like,
Yeah.
hey,
Hmm.
do we have to like actually train these like AI models by throwing massive amounts of compute,
Hmm.
sacrificing massive amounts of energy and water, like Scott was talking about, and
Yeah.
also all this like investments when we could be channeling this into, let's say, sustainable AI as like a different example. I'm yapping on too much about this, but I'll close by saying that
Yeah.
it depends on also like who you ask. So
Yeah.
I found one of the reasons why I love LinkedIn and following like thought leaders like Scott, for example, or
Hmm.
yourself, is because you get to see like hot takes from researchers.
Yeah.
So I included a post from Dr. Sasha Lucioni from Hugging Face again, and
Uh-huh.
she debunks like, the 3 watt ChatGPT theory.
Hmm.
And I think her message was that so number one, it'll depend on who you ask with the research that you do.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
in my slide, I quoted like Epoch AI, that their research actually revealed that a typical ChatGPT query for GPT-4 consumes
Hmm.
roughly zero point 0.3 watt hours, which is 10 times less than the older estimate that you just cited. So 10 times as
Yeah.
much as a Google search.
Yeah.
That's 3 watt hours of electricity according to
Hmm.
what's commonly cited. So
Hmm.
number one, it depends on what organization is calculating with their methodology. Number
Yeah.
two, that's not the point. Like trying to benchmark how much like an individual ChatGPT query like costs per energy.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
important. I will admit that it is important to like benchmark for future research and for future metrics analysis. But
Hmm.
we should be focusing on promoting sustainable AI principles in the broader community and
Hmm.
making sure that these big tech companies, they are like, this is going to be like a hot take maybe, but this podcast is going to be full of hot takes. I did not realize like how much like the big tech companies, like they don't do a really good job of like, publishing all the data that they need to in order for
Hmm.
the AI and environment community to stop just like we are quite literally at the estimate level for like
Hmm.
all of this, like water, energy. Some tech companies publish more data than others. Okay, it's true. I think Meta publishes more data for environmental impacts than like Google or whatever. But
Yeah, yeah.
also at the same time, the point of this is that we are stuck at the estimate level when we
Hmm.
should be at the like quantifiable metric based level where we're like we have a global standards based framework. This is
Yeah.
like, you know, the commonly cited resource for a ChatGPT query.
Hmm.
And it's just so frustrating for me to see that. So again, it depends on who you ask. We should not be focusing obsessively so much about what a
Yeah.
single ChatGPT query costs.
Yeah.
Rather, we should be focusing on promoting sustainable AI like principles across the entire like broader movement. I'm sure maybe Scott has a different take on it, but that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, makes complete sense. And before we get to Scott, since you mentioned about this transparency, AI
Yeah,
transparency or data center transparency, so I was working on my AI nutrition label project.
yeah,
I examined a lot of AI model cards and system cards for environmental transparency, and I found that most companies either don't report exact environmental stats, as you pointed, like Meta did up to some extent, or they point to data center sustainability blogs of the companies that they are using. So on the sustainability commitment blogs, some companies either reported vague progress on their sustainability goals or did not even mention their progress. They just like, okay, this is our goal by 2030, we will do this, that, stuff like that. Just like a child would try to hide their low exam scores in a subject by either not mentioning them or embellishing the discussion with unrelated high scores in other subjects. So that's the kind of scenario that I saw with the sustainability blogs. But one thing that stood apart was the honesty and transparency of Google, which reported a 48% increase in emissions, CO2 emissions since 2019, and they honestly reported that is primarily due to data center energy consumption. Like, how critical is standardized environmental progress reporting for data centers and AI models? And should we be pushing for more mandatory reporting that clearly states carbon footprint, water usage, energy consumption on every model card for AI transparency? And if yes, then how? This
yeah.
is a question
What a
for both of.
question.
Yeah, it's
What
a
a
fully
question.
loaded
Yeah,
question,
yeah.
full of hot takes.
I mean, I've been yapping for like a while now, so Scott, I'll like
Keep
let you
going,
like go.
Nathaniel. Go,
Okay, all
go,
right.
go, go for it. You get. I can jump in. I got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, so in an ideal world, like
Hmm.
obviously in an ideal world,
Transparency
like
is important. Yeah.
transparency is key. Like I think
Yeah.
this is where, so coming from like a policy analyst background, I
Hmm.
think this is where policymakers can truly shine in helping us create these scorecards that are like
Hmm.
true benchmarks for, like I mentioned, like a life cycle assessment. We have these scorecards that contain information about energy, water impacts, embodied
Hmm.
carbon.
Hmm.
There was a really cool presentation that talked about like the ethical sourcing of rare earth minerals that are used in data center like building and just chip design. I was like, the scorecards need to incorporate all of this. So
Yeah.
in
Hmm.
an ideal world, like this is where policy is so important. I'm of the opinion that like there should be mandatory reporting, 100%. I'm an independent researcher. I'm not.
Hmm.
I don't have a vested interest in like these big tech companies. You know, my
Yeah.
coming from a policy background, like that
Hmm.
is a dream for me to see like mandatory reporting be like again mandatory for these big tech companies.
Hmm. Yeah.
Now, when we talk about like the implementation of that and like how
Hmm.
policy can get into that narrative, that
Hmm.
becomes an extremely complex like conversation. Because, for
Hmm.
example, in the US, what we're seeing is this dichotomy between the federal and like the state level right now.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
like, for example, at the federal level, we see this push for a lot of business development, a lot of data center development. The Stargate project is the most commonly cited
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
I think the ludicrous there was a Bloomberg documentary that's been making the rounds quite recently about like
Hmm.
$500 billion of like you know, investment over like a multi-year period. I was like, this is insane. Like all
Yeah.
this financial capital, all the
Yeah.
development. And so to answer your question, at its core, I think policy can definitely like play a
Hmm.
very big part in this.
Hmm.
To this is why independent research is so critical because like
Hmm. Yeah.
we have such amazing talent. Like I've only been in the AI and environment space for, you know, almost close to a year now, and I've
Hmm.
seen all these independent researchers publishing all this great data, all these great
Yeah.
benchmarks. So
Yes.
coming together, forming like, the first like standardized environmental scorecard that everybody could use. These are just
Mm-hmm.
ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And then most interestingly, like at the state level, certain states are kind of ahead, just like that they've always been, like in terms of environmental regulation, like California,
Yes.
classic
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're one of the
Definitely.
most
Yeah.
eco-friendly states. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think policy can definitely play a very big part in this. Whether or
Mm-hmm.
not that actually happens and the
Mm-hmm.
implementation of that,
Mm-hmm.
that's a subject that we can easily have like a 2 hour conversation about.
Well,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
not enough policy changes that are happening. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
you're alluding to a lot of the challenges and changes, certainly in policy in the United States at the moment. And I
Mm-hmm.
think I think with anything regarding sustainability over the next 4 years, it
Yeah,
it it will certainly be Europe that is leading, and large in part of Europe, but usually
right.
leads in these areas.
Yeah.
That this is really where we're starting to see implementation of beginning to look at heat use and beginning
Mm.
to look at look at and reusing and forcing data centers from a policy standpoint to look and explore this and do studies into understanding, well, what are the options for your waste heat from these resources. If you're not putting this to good use, you better have a good reason why you're not and demonstrate why
Yeah.
you can't. So it's always important to look at policy as the stick,
Mm.
and the other side of the coin is
Mm.
carrots. The United States always favors carrot approaches in incentivizing investors to do behaviors that they want. Europe tends to regulate and provide policy changes to mandate these implementations. And so both,
Yeah.
the reality is it's not either, it's both.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
It's the balance of both. Yeah. Right.
but
Balance of both.
it's got a significant amount of opportunity to
Mm-hmm.
that we're not seeing the implementation happen at enough meaningful scale. And I think that we need to create a lot more carrots in these instances.
Mm.
The quantity of capital that is going in to finance the new data center systems, it is
Mm-hmm.
profound. Profound. We have
It's huge.
more than 30 gigawatts of new power generation and new data centers, sorry, that are in the pipeline right now, just in the
Mm.
United States alone,
Yeah.
33 or 34 gigawatts of data center in development at the moment. And we're just at the beginning of this. And so I think back to part of an earlier part of the conversation, we're at the moment navel gazing into the nuance energy requirement of a single query. Now, this is important so that
Mm.
people
Yeah.
contextualize
Right.
what impact searching on an AI versus Google searching has
Mm. Yeah.
today until we've developed sustainable infrastructure to support in the data centers processing and compute or storage requirements to be able to make this happen in a more sustainable way. It is important to really wrap your head and understand that it does have a significant water footprint. It does have a significant impact, and it just really underscores the need and necessity of developing systems that really do prioritize renewable energy assets and non-carbon generating energy sources and the waste heat utilization. These are critical pieces, and understanding some of these, even if they are overestimates, understanding that scale really
Mm.
helps to bring home, like, I'm doing a couple queries and I'm
Mm.
just evaporating an entire bottle of water just to cool that processing
Yeah.
requirement. It really is very, it was even surprising to me as someone that works in
Mm.
these systems and has for the last 10
Yeah.
plus years. And so
Mm.
the important piece, though, is that regardless whether we're talking about DeepSeek really improving the compute and processing requirements,
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
whether the new models and the massive data center systems that we're building to develop and train new systems and models that is paying off and is developing better and more intelligent systems, the reality is that we really have to score and have to measure and have to understand what some of these impacts are. And that starts, yes, it can start from a policy standpoint, but in
Mm.
large in part, when you look across sectors, beyond data centers into technologies, who drives that bus at the beginning? It's customers.
Mm.
Where are the customers that are
Yeah.
demanding the sustainability? And thankfully, we do have the biggest players in the world that are demanding car carbon neutrality, that are
Mm.
demanding water,
Yeah.
uh, lower water footprints. And we do have companies like Microsoft that are out paying to save water in other sectors and industries to
Mm.
offset their water footprint. I mean, this is This is significant and frankly great leadership. And what
Mm.
we need to see is the end users that are utilizing the platform, the companies that are utilizing uh, Copilot and systems and utilizing OpenAI and utilizing Anthropic systems. We need to see the customer and the companies demand more from
Yeah.
the platforms to start beginning disclose. And if we don't put those signals out as
Mm.
consumers, as
Mm.
businesses, and demand
Mm.
that of our platforms that we're doing,
Mm.
they're not in turn going to pass that on, those requirements on the prioritization on to the data centers.
Yeah.
So it's
And I,
really
oh, sorry, go ahead.
critical. Jump in.
I was going to like really quickly. I know like this is such a fascinating question. I was going to add two things to what Scott was saying. So number one,
Mm-hmm.
I think like so what I've also been seeing like a lot of is that in the kind of discourse right now about like who's exactly to blame, the environmental impacts like of AI when it comes to demonizing like a particular like party or group of people, whatever. I think it's also important to acknowledge that the big tech companies, yes, they are responsible for, they want to implement like, Gen AI into like everything that they do and they want to build all these
Yeah.
data centers. But on
Yeah.
the flip side, like I've had conversations with sustainability folks that work at these big tech companies
Mm.
and they are doing like a lot of great work, like
Yeah.
100%. Like I fully,
Yeah.
like I think part of why there is as much conversation right now is because of the fact that like a lot of these big tech companies have put out like sustainability reports. Like for example, you just acknowledged that Google, I think I read that as well, like Google
Mm.
said like, hey, actually our carbon emissions are actually going up because we are
Mm.
implementing Gen AI into everything. It's
Yeah.
something that we're working on. And then Scott
Mm-hmm.
also just mentioned Microsoft purchasing of, we're going to fill in this aquifer because we're using all this water for data centers. We fully acknowledge that, but we're trying to offset that. So there is a lot of work to be done in,
Mm.
promoting better transparency, better tracking, better metrics. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that a lot of the good sustainability work that has come so far is
Mm.
that a lot of big tech companies are also
Yeah.
investing into the flip side when it comes
Mm.
to promoting, the greener aspects of their technology. Now,
Mm.
for example, if you're investing $100 billion into data center development, should you be investing the equal amount into sustainable AI development? 100%. Let's have that
And
conversation.
yeah,
You know what I
but
mean?
that's not
But it's not.
what's
Yeah, exactly.
happening.
Like
Yeah.
I think there's
The
also.
the
Go ahead.
the important part though, Nathaniel, is that the realization, the critical piece for entities, for hyperscalers, for these
Right.
companies to understand is they don't need to invest all of this capital. What they need
Mm.
to
Right.
do is they need to site their facility. What they need
Right.
to do is they need to do
Right.
the feasibility study and engineering work of saying, hey, this is possible. We're building our infrastructure. We're investing in a gigawatt data center. We have to invest in the energy to power this. So you have to develop new power generation to meet the power demands. But then all of this waste heat utilization, whether that's a district heating system or
Right.
greenhouses or cooling systems or CO2 capture systems or water capture systems or water desalination systems, all of these are possible. The data
Right.
center does not have to be responsible to finance all of those things. This
Right.
can be done in contracts with other investors and other companies, and it should be entire ecosystems
Mm.
that are
Right.
being catalyzed by this. And this
Yeah.
is a really critical part that it's not just data centers. This is the circular economy mentality shift. It is
Right.
that
Mm.
you need to set up systems for success. You don't
Mm.
have to bear all of the cost. You don't have to
Right.
bear all of the risk. You don't have to bear all of these different asset classes, but you have to set up that system to be
Right.
able to be possible. If you locate yourself on an island and there's no room for anything else, or anywhere else, like clearly that's not going to be possible. But if you
Yeah.
locate yourself in a place where that is a possibility, and you have that foresight that okay, we don't have the budget to put in hundreds of acres of greenhouses or another $1 billion water desalination facility to be able to support all these other needs, or massive gigaton scale carbon capture, direct air carbon
Mm.
capture and sequestration project. These are completely different asset classes, completely different businesses that require a whole bunch of specialized expertise, but they should be paired together because it reduces that cost, because it should
Mm.
be paired together because they can capture more water than is necessary to cool that facility. They
Yeah.
should be doing this, but not carrying that financial burden. And this is a really important leap
Mm.
that all businesses, all industrial processes really struggle to get over that gap.
Yeah, that's a really like good that's a I guess I didn't think about like the cost effective way of like sharing sharing the financial burden quite literally like with partnerships. I think that that's what I've seen also on the big tech company side is that they are partnering a lot with various like different organizations to do all this great research. It's just interesting because like in a lot of the discourse that I've seen on like, you know, LinkedIn groups and like discussions I've had with people, there
Yeah.
also is this like moral argument in play, like that a lot of folks have raised on the big tech company side, like, hey, if you're investing all this technology into like AI development, then you should be the one to carry that cost like fully.
Yeah, but
That's
that's not
also
how
the
our world
moral.
works.
That
Like
there we
Yeah.
go. So yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
reality of
exactly.
our world is
Yeah,
not
Yeah.
like
yeah,
that's not the reality of the situation.
right,
Sure, it should be. We
right.
also shouldn't have 800 million people that are hungry right this second. That
Fair. Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that
Yeah.
should have been solved. That should have been
Decades
solved
ago.
decades
Yeah,
ago. Like this is
right,
we
Yeah.
right,
have the capability of producing enough food and calories. We don't do
right,
that. Why don't we do that? We have enough money. We have enough technologies. Like I said, we grow bananas 2 hours from Toronto here, 365 days a year.
right,
We can grow
right,
any food
Yeah.
we want. We're choosing consciously and subconsciously to not do these things. So
right.
recognizing and being real about the situation we're in is a really important piece. And so by accepting it, by not accepting status quo and making steps to move forward and demanding it, it's got to start with, setting up to be successful, setting up to enable other businesses to be able to take on these resources, demanding and procuring energy that doesn't have a carbon footprint, locating those facilities and sites where you are able to take advantage of the low carbon energy. And it has long-term benefits. It has the benefit of not having a stranded asset in 10 years from now when someone else developed a data center that does have zero carbon and zero water footprint, and your data center now gets all the low cost work, and you're not able to meet or afford to buy the latest processors because
Right,
you're not able to get the best rates, and that
right,
and no one,
Yeah.
like, data centers are run with tenants, and if no one is continuing to honor their leases, they're going to go to another data center. They don't really care that your
right.
data center happens to
Yeah,
be located there. There's a short window of time right now where we have this huge and massive growth for scaling, and the race to getting to AGI, or the race to getting to superintelligence, which is unbelievably fast. But
yeah.
once that point gets tipped over, you know, we are going to continue to build and grow data centers. And you don't have to look far to see how humans, what we do when we find new energy resources, what we do when we find new resources that we're able to utilize. We consume more. Even if as they get more efficient, we consume significantly more.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
that's a fresh perspective about the financial burden splitting across different companies, sectors, and entire ecosystem. So you mentioned about EU playing a major role in regulations. So I recently came across through Nathaniel's post that EU just announced that they are planning to
oh
set
yeah.
water usage caps for data centers by 2026, essentially telling AI companies you can't drink our water reserves dry. So we are already seeing some AI companies potentially looking to relocate to regions with fewer restrictions. So are we about to witness the world's first AI water wars where countries compete to either attract or repel these thirsty data centers?
That's a, uh, yeah, that's
Fully
a very,
loaded
yeah,
question.
another
Yeah.
fully loaded question. Scott, I'll let you go first because I was yapping like first before.
Yeah,
I
this
mean,
is what I really love to have, literally a conversational interview. So yeah, just go on.
cool. Well, I don't think we're going to get into a war. I think that we're always going to be in competitive environment on an hourly, on a second by second basis. The way that we have the capability of deploying resources, having satellite-based internet and interconnectivity globally really democratizes where compute can happen in many different places. Now, there are obviously geographic limitations where companies want processing to happen or stay within certain countries and want to be out of certain areas. But within parameters, within what is the lowest levelized cost of energy, and it's going to be different in different markets at different time periods because of the sun. The cheapest form of energy, levelized cost of energy, is solar and wind. And it's cheaper when those two overlap. And there are plenty of places around the world where solar and wind resources are in the same spot. And if you've got wind turbines spinning and they're generating 3 cents a kilowatt hour below rates, and you've got solar resources that are delivering the same kind of scaled things. And when they overlap and when there's not enough consumption on the grid, you can even get to negative power pricing where you're getting paid to use energy. And we will see compute and we will see resources being deployed in these data centers. And as these new hubs of places where we develop infrastructure, and large in part, it's not just data centers. This is all of our manufacturing. This is how we will be moving. The vast majority of the places where we make things is going to be the cheapest form of energy. And so we are going to absolutely see a change and a shift on where we're building these resources based on the ability to generate low cost energy resources. So that's what I think we're going to see moving forward. Certainly on the water side of things, this is a whole other limitation. But again,
Mm,
when I look at water falling from the sky. I look at
mm,
water from the ground resources. I look at
mm,
water from the oceans. I look at
mm,
water as humidity in the air. And because all
mm.
of these are usable resources to be able
Yeah.
to bring and feed into a system. And so if you're doing a direct air carbon capture system and you're
Mm.
co-locating that alongside a data center, you're utilizing that waste heat. You can take that lower grade heat and you can upgrade that to the temperature, and you can use that to cycle the amine. You can use that to dehumidify that water and take all of that air handling. And yeah, you've got to process a ton of air to extract CO2 from it. But all of that water that you now have can now be used for irrigation. It can be used for potable water. It can be used for drinking water. You can use that low temperature heat to run desalination processes
Yeah.
that are low temperature. They take up more physical space than reverse osmosis systems, but they don't take a significant amount of energy. And so you've got plenty of these capabilities of designing systems and infrastructure that are way more resilient, that are way better. The limiting factor will mainly be, yes, you need to have water resources, but it's
Mm.
mainly going to be your energy, where we're going to locate these systems, and then the policy and the stability of those governments and the jurisdictions that they're in.
Yeah.
So I'll broaden the conversation.
Hmm.
Scott did a very really great job of like focusing like on the specifics when you're talking about like resource constraints and also
Hmm.
geographic like mobility of like where we're building all this stuff out. I
Yeah.
think like what's been fascinating for me personally on the policy side is seeing the evolution of AI policy and like how it's being used like geopolitically. For
Mm.
example, President Trump was recently in the UAE where they signed a ton of business deals, billions of dollars of capital. It just sheer ludicrousy, like when it came to like the sheer scope of financial deals that were being signed. And it's been interesting. Like there was a really cool, so the CSIS, the Center for Strategic International Studies,
Sounds
if I'm
fun to me.
getting that like
Hmm.
acronym right. So they
Uh-huh.
have a great podcast called the AI Policy Podcast. Hopefully I'm
Hmm.
getting like those two like really correct. And so they had a recent episode about the evolution of AI policy and how it's being used. Like AI policy is at the forefront of geopolitical relationships between
Yeah.
countries. So to
Yes.
Scott's point about like, where, for example, data set, not to make this conversation fully about data centers, but like
Hmm.
where data center operators are choosing to build out their infrastructure, where AI companies like OpenAI, Anthropic are choosing to fund projects. Like everyone's kind of looking towards geopolitics right now and saying
Yeah.
like, okay, like what are the most like lucrative business partnerships that we can be a part of to
Yeah.
spin off different
Yeah.
infrastructure agreements and pathways? It's been very interesting. I think as a result of the UAE like partnership like with the US and
Hmm.
AI policy with, the diffusion rule and
Hmm.
export controls, like that's a whole nother
Yeah.
conversation in
Yeah. Yeah.
itself. I won't get into that. But because of that, I think number one, companies and partnerships are happening on a massive scale that we are not seen before. Like with this
Hmm.
evolution of like AI policy and like its rising like stage center point in geopolitics.
Hmm.
Fascinating. Number two, on the resource constraint side, I did not know this. Like honestly, before I like dove into the AI field and started learning about like where things
Yeah.
are being built and like why. In the data center world, like a lot of like operators will consider like for example, energy, water, land use, environmental justice concerns, or at least they should be taking more note of that in some cases
Yeah.
when they are starting to build these like gigawatt like data centers, right?
Hmm.
So as more like as more blocks, political blocks, like start to impose different types of like regulations and use conditions for, let's say, the EU just did their water thing at the end of
Yeah.
2026.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're going to see a shift in like where infrastructure is going to be built. These are
Mm.
for-profit companies at the end of the
Yeah.
day, which means that they are maximizing the amount of
Profit.
revenue they can generate while also at the same time balancing resource constraints. So
Mm.
I think we will see a shift over time as more, again, political, blocks like the EU, the US, whatever, start to either impose like, more tariffs in this
Mm.
case, like as we see, or just like start to be more resource conscientious of like, hey, wait, these data centers are like sucking like a lot of energy and water. Like,
Mhm.
do we really want this at the end of the day? So
Yeah.
we might see the shift of where these data centers are being built. Like I can tell you, so right now I'm in Cambodia, right?
Mhm.
And the Southeast Asia area is a untapped area from what I can tell for data center development. So in
Mm.
the news, I'm
Yes.
seeing like business deals being signed left and right between
Mm.
like the countries over here
Yes.
and
Yeah.
like, OpenAI, for example, or
Mhm.
other AI companies, not to name
Mhm.
that specifically. And
Mm.
so I think again, number one, we'll see this evolution of AI policy on the geopolitical scale. Number two, obviously these for-profit companies, data center operators, AI companies, whatever, they will consider where to build out their infrastructure depending on what the policy environment is, whether it's either receptive or slightly more hostile. It depends.
Mm.
And then number three, as more infrastructure is being built out over the next couple of years, that will be highly geographic specific, like from what I can tell, and
Yeah.
also constrictive as well, like just
Mm.
overall.
And I
Yes.
think it also layers into trust, right?
Mm.
Yeah,
If you think back to, how on the geopolitical side of things, how much do you trust in where your data is going and how that's
right.
being stored and copied?
Mm.
This
Yeah.
this is playing a huge, huge component. And
Data
so I think
privacy. Yeah.
it's a big concern.
Right.
And it especially as we integrate data and agents and
Mm.
systems at the
Agents. Oh my God.
core of business, right? So if you run, a multinational company
Mm.
and half of your staff are now agents, and where those agents are being domiciled and being
Mm.
processed and being run
Mm.
will likely begin to have tax implications, will likely
Right.
begin to have data security and privacy risks. And because when these become part of your intellectual property and literally your workforce, you need to be very careful about how that's being handled or done, especially if
Yeah.
you're going to compete with other companies that maybe are national assets or national companies that you're competing with.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of layers of critical
Mm.
thinking. What I
Yeah.
think that we're really going to start seeing is we're going to see these huge, massive data centers that will house huge abilities to train large scale models and systems. And I think that we'll see massive capabilities and benefits coming from those large scale systems. But then on the flip side, we're going to start to see a lot more of these distributed systems at back to the company level, back to the local level, back to every city having their own data center to run infrastructure and city operations, back to each company having significant data centers that now we can containerize and put into buildings and act really literally as heaters to replace our heating and HVAC infrastructure in our building systems. We should be. I mean, why wouldn't we do that where
Right.
you can localize
Mm.
storage
Yeah.
and local compute that you don't need a gigawatt data center to run and do some small individual queries. I've got a Galaxy phone and I'm able to do minor compute capabilities just on my phone directly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we don't need a gigawatt data center, and that frankly isn't going to give me any benefit of
Mm.
utilizing that over a small scale system that then could actually give me benefit for local food production, as an
Mm.
example, or heating the
Yeah.
building that I'm in. And you
Yeah.
might want to just take on additional processing requirement because it's cold outside and it's better than turning on a radiator that just wastes electricity. Why not
Mhm.
process some Bitcoin or
Mm.
run run some storage or some compute for somebody else? Like it would make sense to have distributed resources in a global compute
Mm.
world that
Yeah.
frankly is not that far away.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I
Yes.
think
Makes
like
sense.
on the data infrastructure side as well, what I've been seeing like over the past couple of months is like the term like AI factory. And like I think that
Mm.
refers to
Yeah.
like, again, I'm not a data center operator, so
Yeah.
but like I think an AI factory from like what I read, it's like
Mm.
it's a hyper specific data center that is just used for like AI processing, AI tasks, they're like huge infrastructures that are being like built up like specifically for that. I thought in my mind this was my uneducated knowledge base like a while ago. I thought all data centers were used for AI specifically, but that
Yeah, that's
someone
not true.
corrected me
Yeah,
recently, and it's just like
yeah.
no, like we actually were using data like long before AI was whatever as popularized as it is now. Data center for
Yeah.
research, like in the U.S., all these different use cases, and it's only now that like this synthesis of like the AI and like data center thing are like
Yeah,
coming. One
yeah,
observation that I just wanted to throw in there was like
yeah.
this emergence of like the AI factory, maybe subset of data centers that has been very interesting. Then
Yeah.
to Scott's point about like this decentralized like benefit that like feeds back, for example, into local towns. That's a very important like point because like one of the key discussion points that I think that any town, like let's say, in your local community, you have like a data center that's being built in your backyard. What is like the benefit that the local community gets out of that data center? That is a conversation that like I think we're not having enough of, or at least like that from what I've noticed, I haven't seen like a lot of that going on. I think a great
I've seen
example,
pushback
but
specifically on that. You know, a
yeah,
few years
exactly.
ago
Yeah,
in New
right,
Mexico, Meta tried to develop or had a data center, and they tried to develop their own renewable energy
right,
solar project alongside it, and
right.
paying for it all themselves. And ultimately, the community came up and blocked them and said, "We're
Yeah,
not going to approve your permit here, even though it's your own data center feeding your own
right,
solar project on your own land. We're not agreeing to do this because." You're utilizing our grid. You might be putting more solar energy, but you're still going to be utilizing the other power plants, and we're going to give you net metering capabilities, but you're not providing any community benefit to us.
exactly.
And I
Yeah,
think this is a huge miss. This goes back to looking at the whole ecosystem, and it
yeah,
doesn't have to be. Don't put a bunch of diesel generators that sit around doing nothing for your backup power. Put up a large battery energy storage system that's your backup power. Use that battery system to begin stabilizing the overall grid so the grid can start to take more intermittent generation resources onto it. Begin using your waste heat to start providing community benefit.
right,
It takes thinking outside of the data center, outside of beyond the server and the four walls that house it. That's what it really takes. And again, it's not, we don't need to invent anything. You just have to spend the
Yeah.
time
right,
and a
Yes.
little bit of money to pay some engineers to figure out what the right opportunity really is. And it is a complete waste to not do that. And it's going to be critical, and the communities should be demanding more
right.
of infrastructure that's being built. Should be, especially in a situation where they begin taking so many jobs. And and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like
that's a big
like
thing.
this is super critical for us as a species, as a
Right,
society. If we are going to put these at the center of our businesses and our operations, they better be providing community benefit to us.
right.
Yeah.
I think like also another thing is like so we're talking about jobs, we're talking about heat reclamation for, agriculture or for like another big thing that I saw was like heating public pool systems that like for example, a lot of public school districts like just have
We might have lost it.
I guess
I'll I'll
it's
I'll,
his
I'll
internet.
continue on his point
Yeah.
with the increased utility bill. So I spoke with somebody just last week at an event in Virginia, and he was just blown away at his power bill for his house going up 3 times, and was
Yeah.
asking me like, what's going on there? And I was like, well, actually, it's going to get a lot worse. If I looked at, showed him the recent data centers that are being developed in Virginia's, you know, top one or two in the whole of states of the entire US for the
Yeah.
new data center development. And so what happens in these situations is when you've got constraints on that grid, on the power consumed in those areas, your power pricing is adjusted towards that.
Yes, yes,
This
yes, yes.
and so this comes back to, again, how you choose to develop and how you choose to site and build. Data centers can be catalysts to affording much more energy production, providing excess power to communities, putting in how you're storing that power to be able to benefit those communities. That's the pathway that is on the table and can be there if we choose to select that. We should have communities that are having and developing the right policy, the right the right permitting places to say, look, if you want to develop a data center here, we're going to make it very easy for you to do interconnect. We're going to make it very easy for you to
Yeah.
do a virtual net metering opportunity. We're going to make it very easy, and we're going to provide guarantees on putting in a district heating system so you can you don't have to waste all this water. In order to do that and come here, yeah, you're going to have to participate. You're going to have to benefit our community. But if in doing that, we're going to help you build your data center a lot better and faster. Or we're going to be able to let you access capital to finance your data center at lower cost because we're going to use our credit rating from our state or our province or our
Yeah.
country to bring you here. And these are the carrot side of the equation that we
Yeah.
really need to have our conversations a lot more deeper, especially right now in these moments of building and developing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a very powerful response to the question that initially started with water caps, and like we covered the entire spectrum of sustainability. Like we have talked enough about the data centers. Let's space travel with you because you have worked with NASA. So you have mentioned that space is the Formula One of sustainability sector that drives innovation in LEDs, batteries, water treatment, and CO2 capture. So, what can AI training learn from space exploration to make it more energy efficient and sustainable, apart from the heat recapture model that you spoke about?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason I became an expert
Mm-hmm.
in life support systems in space is because it is a perfect analogy. It is that extreme
Mm-hmm.
environment
Yeah.
where you have to be perfect. You have to be
Mm-hmm.
perfect with your air handling systems. You have to be perfect with your energy systems. If you lose power on board the space station, everybody will die very rapidly. It's extreme temperature changes. You need air handling systems to remove that CO2. You need to recycle all of that water. We don't have huge reservoirs and capability of doing that. And so it becomes what is called critical infrastructure. And so what can AI learn from these systems is the same thing that all of this infrastructure that's required to keep the astronauts alive. It's that capability, it's that requirement for understanding what an extreme version of that situation looks like to develop your design parameters. You don't need to be as perfect as that situation, but we need to be way better than what we're doing today. We're not taking those things into account. And so where it becomes really helpful from a training standpoint, from a data model standpoint, it is better understanding what systems integration really looks like in that extreme spot. Like, it creates data sets that you really can understand process flow. You can really understand design systems. You can really one of the key things that I point to is there are many unknown unknowns anytime you're developing any individual
Yeah.
project. On the International Space Station, there was a water leak that was discovered, but it wasn't
Mm.
discovered for 5 or 6 years after
Yeah.
it had been built. And what they came to understand was that the water leak came in the return water line coming from the dehumidification system. And it came
Mm.
there because the amount of the CO2 that they were capturing in the air and the cabin atmosphere has a much higher level of CO2 than here on Earth. And
Mm.
that high amount of CO2, and CO2 is acidic. And so
Yeah.
that high amount of CO2 concentrated into the humidity capture water slowly over years dissolved the welds in that water line, caused a water leak. Was easily repaired, and the water was cleaned up from that. But if that was to happen on Mars, or that was to happen in a far off in a more extreme situation, this is you're literally going to have to walk people out of an airlock if you
Mm.
do not have enough water resources to be able to support the people. And so, these become these systems where you can really closely monitor, where you can really gain understanding of what these unknown systems are. And as a
Mm.
data center, you know, how that can and how AI models can monitor and measure and manage our infrastructure from our water treatment systems here on Earth for cities, for
Mm.
waste treatment facilities, for our manufacturing processes, for our energy distribution. These become really great spots for how that works and operates in that spot as well. And as we see more and more development and integration of more space-based compute and more space-based power generation and more space-based systems to distribute connectivity globally, these lessons we're going to begin to be layered on more. Nathaniel, welcome back. We're talking about
Yeah,
Sorry
welcome
about
back.
that. I apologize.
No worries at all. Yeah, so we were doing a little bit of space travel since we had talked a lot about data centers. So we were trying to utilize Scott's experience working with NASA and
Oh,
using
awesome.
space model and applying it to the sustainability of AI systems. So yeah, he was just talking about that.
I can
Hmm.
comment on that in like two ways. So the first thing that I've noticed in like the data center world is sending data centers into space. That's like one of the
Uh-huh.
like Scott was just like, "Oh God, here he goes."
No, I mean, I said the same. I said that. Like, I think
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, yeah.
it's a great place to continue on though. Go for it.
No,
It's not a
I
crazy
was
idea.
amazed by that, by the concept of even like sending data centers to space, because like in the AI and like energy deep dive that we did over the weekend, Caltech had a space solar project back from 2023. And so like this, imagination of like, or this imaginative concept of like sending data centers to space using pure solar energy, quite literally, to like power the entire like apparatus that you have over there. I can't really comment on like the feasibility of that because I'm not a space engineer by any means, but like I find the concept very interesting to be able to like even do that. And then the Caltech Space Solar project, that was incredible to be able to find that and just like see solar literally being beamed down in terms of transmission capacity from the upper atmosphere into solar panels on the planet. I was just amazed by like the confluence of like everything in that area.
So it's not solar panels that it gets beamed down to. So it's a
Oh,
radio frequency. It's a microwave energy, sorry, that gets transmitted back down to
my
Earth
bad.
here.
Yeah.
So what you do is you have large solar panel arrays that are orbiting in some interesting orbits, but they're able to get complete 100% not being in the shade of Earth, and so you're able to get complete power and deliver that to places on the planet. Um, very specifically, very accurately at very large scales and have 24/7 baseload power operations to be able to be supported from those areas. So these are fantastic tools that we're now
Yeah.
testing at large scales. These are not new ideas, to
Right.
be clear. Like these ideas have
Yes.
been around since the 1970s to be able to come in and provide these capacities. It's really now that we're actually investing in doing some of these and still nowhere near enough, to be
Hmm.
clear.
Right.
Yeah.
But the AI data centers as well, these are great places to domicile and locate data center systems. It's a lot of really interesting questions from a jurisdiction and which country is this part of and how you're going to regulate and control these assets, the security of these systems. But on a practical side of building data centers in space, heat rejection is a really challenging component to do in a vacuum and actually
Mm.
removing that heat.
Yeah.
So using it is really important.
Hmm.
But then how you actually get rid of excess heat is a big challenge in space. So we have
Mm.
Interesting.
entire radiator systems that,
Yeah.
you don't have other molecules and air molecules to run up against to take that energy out. And so,
Yeah.
these become challenges, not insurmountable by any stretch, but as it
Yeah.
scales up, these are bigger and bigger challenges that we're going to have to face. But we've had computer data systems and data center operations in space since we've been in space.
Right.
You need these systems. So this isn't really new. It is a very more extreme environment with
Yeah.
radiation and gamma rays, and as we go into further and more challenging orbits, it's got a
Yeah.
whole bunch of other computational challenges and how we wire these systems, how you deal with space weather and high
Yeah.
energy particles
Yeah.
that are coming from the sun or from
Yes.
other stars. Like these are
Yeah.
very real challenges.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So we did a very edutaining space travel, like going back to your experience with NASA and hearing great insights from Nathaniel. So let's pivot our conversation beyond the environmental costs of training and running AI models. So there's of course an increasing focus on using AI for as a climate solution. So based on your 500 plus resources, Nathaniel, which AI applications for climate action show the most promise? And Scott, as someone building actual infrastructure projects and being an architect of sustainability, which of these applications are ready for real world implementation today versus just being theoretical?
Yeah, another loaded question. I mean, I think before diving into like the AI for good
Hmm.
applications with like how AI can be used to like,
Hmm.
further the fight against like climate change and all that, I think it's also important to acknowledge that AI is not like a silver bullet for climate change. Like that's one thing that
Yeah,
like
enabler.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's like one thing that I personally believe is that like since
Hmm.
the technology carries like such a massive environmental impact, like it's great. Don't get me wrong that it's being deployed in so many
Hmm.
ways, and I'll get into that as
Yeah.
well. But I think
Yeah.
also at the same time, on the education front, like I see like one of like two camps basically. It's like the first is like people are just like, what? Like AI has like an environmental impact. What are you talking about? Like, shouldn't we be using AI in like literally everything that we do? And then the other side is
Yeah.
that we shouldn't be using like AI sometimes at all with like
Mm.
specific climate solutions because believe it or not every solution requires AI. Like that's also like another big
Yeah,
thing
definitely.
that
Yeah.
like
As a product manager, I can definitely
exactly,
vouch for that statement. Yeah.
I feel like it feeds also into like the entire like venture capital like hype fund like
Mm.
every like for example when
Yeah.
there's this common joke in the industry like from what my
Mhm.
machine learning engineer friends tell me that like is
Mhm.
when they talk about
Mhm.
like AGI and ASI and all this great stuff it's like it's always 5 years
Uh-huh.
away but like they do that like we're about to come out with AGI and it's like great we can raise another like series A 40 billion round seed fund for like for our startup but yeah, I just wanted to toss that out there. Like, I mean, I think that quote again comes from Dr. Legioni. Like,
Mhm.
she's a great source of like quotes and all that great stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
AI, I think that's from her TED Talk, is like AI is not a silver bullet for climate change, if I'm not like messing that
Mhm.
up. Now, on the AI for good applications, oh my goodness, like I can talk for hours about like the way that AI is being rolled out into different areas of climate change. Like, for example, one of the more interesting use cases that I've seen quite recently is in agritech. So like, for example, agricultural technology, as we know, climate change, like for example, I think it was in either Italy or Greece, like there was like this one startup company that was working with vineyard farmers because like European summers are frankly getting like hotter and hotter all the time. And that's just all across the planet. So farmers
Mm.
are increasingly having to balance, sacrificing like their vineyard yield capacity on a yearly basis because like it's getting too hot to grow stuff and there's also not enough rainfall. So this one startup was working with, and this was a prototype, but they were working with some vineyard farmers or vineyards folks like in the Italy or Greece region where they were implementing, I think it's called water smart drip irrigation systems in order to max the amount of water that they could use to like water their, vineyards quite literally. And then they were using
Mm.
drone technology with machine learning on the back end because it's not just about, generative AI. When we talk about AI, it's an all encompassing field. Gen AI is just like a small piece of that. I thought Gen AI was all of AI before like I started
Uh-huh.
learning about
Yeah,
like
definitely. It's just a part.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's an umbrella term. It's like there's deep
Hmm.
learning, there's
Yeah.
neural networks, and it's just fascinating
Hmm.
to learn about it. But they were using drones, for example, to monitor the spreading of a particular pestilence or like a parasite that would like completely eat through like their entire vineyards. So it's a combination of like computer vision, drone technology, AI to like
I guess
maximize like
he's
your water
frozen now.
output in your
Wait,
smart drip irrigation
I'll
system.
I'll add a couple
Oh,
things.
great.
Nathaniel,
Oh, I'm back.
we lost you there for you're
Yeah.
back.
Can you
Oh,
repeat the
my bad.
last? Yeah.
Yeah, just really quickly before I cut off again, hotel internet.
Mm.
Combination of like drone technology, computer vision, AI to like essentially just like ensure that vineyard growth is optimal in an increasingly
Mm.
harsh environment, just with temperature, lack of rainfall, etc. That has been like one of the more, I would say,
Mm.
interesting use cases that I've seen in like the past couple of months. But there's plenty.
Yeah. Got it. Got it.
I'll continue on that, and I think that's an interesting example, but I think it does a bit of disservice because of the scale. So
Mm.
drip irrigation and efficient water usage is happening at millions of acres in scale of agriculture. We're using precision agriculture systems where we're using drones and satellite overviews to go down each individual field and specifically tracking exactly where that tractor moves and exactly the right fertilizer that's needed on that little small quadrant of that farm. And so you need to apply more nitrogen in this area, more phosphorus in this area. And so the tractor automatically does and deploys fertilizer in that specific way. So we have huge resources that are already being deployed that are leveraging massive amounts of data and resources and remote sensing capabilities. And so these are already well in practice at millions of acre scales globally. Certainly in Canada and the United States are highly developed. The other areas that these can be catalytic towards that I thought you were going to talk about was something called agrivoltaics, where we're now putting solar panels in and above or between rows in crops and being able to provide additional levels of protection from extreme weather events, extreme rain or hail or washout or temperature, and really retaining more moisture in those soils, reducing the amount of irrigation that needs to happen in these areas. And the part, I'm going to go back to the data center side of things and back to how these get catalyzed. The
Mm-hmm.
part that starts that is the customer that says, we want to buy renewable energy and we'd like to
Mm.
prioritize agrivoltaics. We'd like to prioritize where you're creating benefit. You're not taking farmland out of circulation. You're improving the agriculture productivity of these areas. And sometimes that actually costs more because you literally have to lift the solar panels up in the amount of racking and systems that you need to put in so that, or the type of actuator, so that the solar panels go vertical and to allow a tractor to go through. It just costs more money than doing the stuff that's lower and 100% utilizing the space, but spreading them out by 20% so there's enough sunlight that can still go down. But it takes a customer to write a power purchase agreement to say, I want to buy electricity in this form and I'm willing to pay a small premium. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be a significant amount, but a small premium to pay for that additional cost and get that ecosystem benefits. And this is how these become catalysts for what will
Mm.
need to be gigawatts of power generation. And so
Yeah.
this is this is why systemic change in how we build and develop the infrastructure is super critical and how that creates those ecosystem benefits. But I want to come back to say answering your question as well and how these larger AI systems can be applied from a climate standpoint. And what I see as a really big catalyst towards this are the climate models in our ability to be able to predict. We're now able to go 14 days out with significant accuracy in weather forecasting.
Mm.
This is a huge
Yeah.
difference when you're able to move this out and as these models get better, as we're able to get and push past this into 30-day, if we could develop systems that could start to do this on 60, 90-day time cycles, I mean, I'm not
Mm.
sure if we're going to be able to get there in a
Mm.
reasonable time frame, but I mean, super
That will be
intelligence,
huge. Yeah.
it will mean you can plan from a food
Mm.
production standpoint
Yeah.
with significant accuracy. This will be a profound change
Mm.
in our ability. So building these models that become hyper accurate in that weather forecasting predictability is critical. The other really big area that is also the risk is from an insurance standpoint. So how we define and create insurance, how we deal with the reality of a sea level rising, of these extreme storm situations, of the damage to infrastructure that is happening, whether that's a wildfire, whether that's a flood, whether that's a hurricane, tornado situation, whether that's hail,
Yeah.
or drought. These have major implications, and the reality of where we live and where we've built our infrastructure today are not in the best places to be resilient towards
Yeah.
this. And 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 what we will see over the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades of time is we'll see areas that become completely uninsurable. And we're seeing this today from a certainly from a fire risk standpoint. And what I see the ability for AI really to be utilizing today is really becoming deeply embedded in this area where we can create much more predictability, where we know we need to better manage a forest, where we know we need to better manage the infrastructure and plan and build dikes and build water systems and model that highly accurately. This is really transformative, and we have to continue investing in this resilient side of the reality of our new world. So these are really important areas.
I think like
Yeah.
another like interesting like area that we haven't mentioned besides like insurance, wildfire management, natural event forecasting, all that good stuff is industrial decarbonization. Like there are frankly like a lot of carbon intensive, energy intensive like, and this also goes back to like kind of geopolitics and like bringing back manufacturing to the United States. And so like this is kind of an example where like we can sync up like geopolitical priorities with like what this current administration wants, but like also using like an AI for good application to also do environmental good as well, despite whatever's happening with like regulations right now. at the
Yeah.
federal level. But setting that aside, like for example, one thing that I saw was like the steel and aluminum industries. These industries are very like, or cement even, like, like these are all very carbon intensive, very energy intensive industries. And like what I've been seeing is like, I had a conversation recently with some sort of supply chain logistics scientist. That was the name of like his job title. I was like, that's a really cool job title.
Interesting. Yeah.
Even better than AI for good researcher being a self-stylized one, you know what I mean? But he was pointing out like, hey, this is like he sent me like a report, and then he pointed out like, hey, this is our supply chain. We're using AI to identify like A, B, and C. These are like the greatest points where we're emitting the most carbon, and we're using AI to find like alternative compounds that are not as like carbon intensive, energy intensive, all that great stuff. So I think like if we can, on the industrial decarbonization side, like steel, aluminum, manufacturing, like finding like it kind of goes back to what Scott was saying earlier with like the insurance industry and like also homeowners at the same time. Like I have family out in California that were impacted by the wildfires, and just like friends that were impacted by the Palisades fire quite recently too. And so like we see like this withdrawal of these insurance companies because like, hey, it's too much cost to insure like a fire policy or whatever. But if we can use AI to somehow balance all this stuff and like better prepare for natural disasters and like kind of correlate that to like building homes and stuff like that, it's kind of all these things kind of interconnect together, which is like I think what we'll start to see more of as we go into the future is this synthesis of like policy, of business, corporate responsibility, home ownership, all these things coming together. So it's very
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, to add to all these great use cases, Scott, you mentioned in your LinkedIn post about coral reefs. You mentioned that there may be only years remaining to experience their biodiversity, and projects like the ocean cleanup and other projects that are ongoing, they are working actively towards cleaning up the ocean so that we can conserve and preserve the biodiversity that we have in our oceans and what other water bodies. So yeah, like there are a plethora of opportunities of AI in climate change, and it can act as an enabler, of course, as Nathaniel mentioned, a dual use technology for sure. So let's wrap this conversation. Like I don't feel like, but we have to because I have taken almost half an hour extra of both of your time. So as we wrap this conversation, I would like to get your vision for the future. Imagine it's 2035 and we have successfully developed AGI while minimizing its environmental impact. What does that world look like to you, and what's one critical decision that we need to make today as a humanity as a whole to ensure AGI development serves both human progress and planetary health?
You know,
Yeah,
I'll
that's good. Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
I
Yeah.
was gonna say I'll start with the coral reefs for a second. So 2035, you better have
Mhm.
been scuba diving and snorkeling between now and then, because regardless of what we do with AGI, regardless of anything else, we
Mhm.
are not going to have the biodiversity in our coral reefs. There's
Mhm.
This is sort of pretty much baked in. There's already
Mhm.
83% of all coral reefs on the planet have experienced bleaching events. This is getting
Yeah.
dramatic, and we cannot produce enough. So go scuba diving and snorkeling now. Uh,
Yeah.
but more from an AI standpoint,
Mhm.
in 2035, what has been done, this is going to sound like a broken record from this conversation, but you know,
Mhm.
what I believe will happen and what we will have implemented will be ability to be able to advantage data centers that have taken into account how they are dealing where where they're catalyzing being carbon neutral energy resources and heat use, where they become critical infrastructure for the communities, for the cities, and for other critical infrastructure that surround these data centers. These will be integral part of our society, and
Mhm.
as critical as we look at turning on the lights today, this is what our data centers and our infrastructure that power the AI systems and the compute requirements and the storage requirements that will be necessary in that world. And so I think that we need to really deeply focus on this today. And I think that the entities and the owners that have had that foresight, if today that are implementing these assets will still have world leading utilized assets in 2035, which is only 10 years away from now. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
it comes pretty fast. So that's sort of
Yeah.
where I see things happening. I think that from a space development standpoint and
Mm.
technology, we will have a significant paradigm shift
Mm.
over the next 10 years of the resource
Yeah.
extraction capabilities in outer space, of the robotic capabilities that will be completely unlocked with this massive growth in AI and our massive growth in robotic systems that will have been developed to be able to produce and utilize those resources. So I think we will see a huge shift and change from a space resource utilization standpoint and from a compute and our power generation standpoint that will be look very dramatically different and be driven by economics from that standpoint. And I think that the investors today that take advantage of what is predictable in over 10-year, 20-year timeframes, it is this critical infrastructure. It is these types
Yeah.
of assets and investment opportunities that become systemically needed, regardless of which platform or AI or AGI system that gets developed.
Mm.
Power is necessary. Compute is necessary. Facilities that can manage and host that as new chipsets come out, as new technological advances, as quantum becomes an integral part of how these systems operate. Power, building infrastructure, being the catalyst for positive change and being the place that the technologies and the platforms that communities want in your community, these are going to be the winning entities, and the investors that take these opportunities at first mover are going to be the
Mm.
ones that have the predictable income and
Mm.
capabilities over the next 10, 20 years time frame.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like
That's a
Scott
powerful input.
summarized it better than I ever could, honestly. Like that was such a succinct way of like tying all the various
Yeah.
topics together. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm going to try to give it like a different answer just to kind of contribute like a
Mm.
different narrative
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
There was a really cool report that recently came out a couple months ago. It was called AI in 2027. It was like a
Mm.
collaborative research effort by like I think 100 of like the top AI researchers in the industry. That was like kind of a simulation based on varying parameters of like where the world could potentially go based on like the
Mm.
rate of agentic AI development, geopolitical
Mm.
forces, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I just bring that as an example because like, that's like a two, like, basically a year and a half, 2 year time span, and things could be radically
Yeah.
different. Now, when we're talking about 2035, AGI, ASI, all this great stuff, I think like it is so hard to predict, like, obviously what life will be like in 10 years,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
to Scott's point, like I think at the end of the day, what people need to realize is that we will be in a different world. Whether or not
Mm.
that's like
Yeah.
wrecked by like
Definitely.
climate change or like, we live on like this weird cyberpunk. I'm a huge sci-fi fan, so like for example, Blade Runner 2049 type environment. Like I'm not sure if that's gonna happen, but like one thing to me stands clear is that just like the world is fundamentally going to be very different. Like everyone knows
Different.
that.
Yeah.
The scale of that change, how that's going to manifest, I can't possibly comment on that. But what I will tell you is that from a climate change standpoint, 10 years from now will be very different
Mm.
in terms of sea level rise. We're already seeing it now with just like the meteorological passing of the seasons, areas of the world that are like, for example, India typically has, and like for example, the summers in India have been noted to be extreme, like like
You can see right
Hey,
now.
bingo. Like I was going to say, like our host, I think, like you're in India, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah, you're based out of there.
Yeah.
Like
Yes. Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
news, there was talk about like how India this year for the Indian summer is going to be 50 degrees centigrade or more. I think that's
Yes.
insane. Like we're going to be living in
Yes.
a world of
Yeah.
massive temperature extremes moving into different parts of the year. So
Mm.
multiply that by like we just gave the coral reef example. Like again, we're at this point right now where
Mm-hmm.
85% of coral reefs. I used to be a marine ecologist. Like we see
Mm.
like this mass bleaching event. Will we have coral reefs in 10 years? Who knows? Scott seems
Yeah.
to think no. You know what I mean?
No.
So
Yeah.
Like
yeah, very
there'll be a
few.
few spots
Right.
that
Very
have
few.
cold from deep water like flows that these will be the only ones that are going to be able to maintain enough
Right.
temperature.
Right. Again, like my point with all this is like the world is going to be like, this is very obvious to say out loud. The world is going to be very different, obviously, in 10
Mm.
years. And I
Mm.
still don't think like, okay, like, yes, if AGI comes out and like we're all out of a job and like we're all on, what is it, universal basic income, which is what this like thing
Mm.
that
UBS.
UBI that I've seen like like, in recent discussions in the techno ethics side of things, like, okay, but I still think like at the end of the day, like regardless of like what the technological advancements are, it's a combination of like good policy, citizen science with stakeholder, like what we were saying through this entire conversation, circular economy thinking that involves all the different stakeholders coming together. That is what will, solve, I put this in quotes, like climate change. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
That is, I think, that's the first main thing I wanted to say. And the second thing is that as it stands right now with AI development, the thing that scares me the most is the misalignment of business
Mm,
priorities and
mm,
honestly just
yeah.
people and also the environments. Like it's again tacking
Mm,
on multi-layered things.
mm,
I think right now, a lot of this AI race that we're currently in the middle of is largely driven by business interests. And this is just my personal opinion. Scott, feel free to disagree with me if you want to. But I think like we are seeing this growing misalignment with this AI race where everyone's determined to be like
mm,
the number
yeah.
AI superpower. Sorry, partially dyslexic, reversing words in my head.
Mm,
And there
mm,
is a massive environmental and human cost to that way of thinking, especially when we're talking about like job displacement, what type of society we're going to live in. The ideal world for me is like, I would love AGI to solve climate change. Will it?
mm,
No, I don't think so.
mm.
Again, I think it'll be a combination of like the technology, people, policy,
Yeah, definitely.
just coming together. And I think we can. That's the thing. Like with all of this, is like I've also seen this argument that we're entering this era of abundance. Like I've seen this term being like thrown around so much.
Yeah.
Like the common argument with that is like if we're entering this era of abundance, like why haven't we like solved, like Scott brought up this point about like we have millions of people around the world that are hungry despite like
Hungry. Yeah.
modern agriculture systems that produce like an excess amount of food, but a lot of it is like wasted, for example, right? These problems are
Yeah.
systemic. It's just that like in some ways like we don't want to solve these problems like at the
Yeah.
top level, which is frustrating. But anyway, all of this to say the world will be very different in 10 years. Number two, I really believe that there is a misalignment right now of AI development at the business, people, and environment scales. And number three, my ideal world is obviously a world, of course, no one wants to live in a world that's like broken by climate change. Of course not. Like I
Yeah.
would like to have kids someday, and like I don't want my kids living
Hmm.
in a world where, the whole coastline is gone because of sea level rise, but that's a reality that we got to
Yeah.
face. So I
Yeah.
think like greater conversations like this, greater inclusion between like industry, people, policy coming together, working on sustainable AI principles. I did not summarize any of that in such an eloquent way like Scott did, but I certainly tried. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very powerful response. And of course, it was filled with a lot of enthusiasm and energy. And Scott's response came from his years of experience.
Right.
So that is why it was like very eloquently summarized and concise. So just to add to the like, to having your kids experience the best environment. Just as we were like, when GPT-4o came in, it was marketed as like, okay, it can count the number of R's in the word
Yeah.
strawberries. So I feel like our kids should be able to eat real strawberries instead of just counting the number of R's in
Nice.
the
Yeah.
strawberries using AI. And also a shift from like nationalism to humanism can help in this like AI race that's going on, where everyone wants to just become the number one nation or a company, and shifting the focus to humanity driven AI development and deployment. So yeah, thank you so much for this very insightful conversation. Like none of my episodes have gone beyond 1 hour. So thank you so much for your time, and I really do respect your time and like how we finally made this thing happen. And of course, thanks to the cups of coffee that we had
Amen.
that kept us
Amen to
through this
that.
conversation. Yeah, thank you so much. And let me stop the recording.